Don't let go, Elena whispered. Her fingers tightened around the small hand beside her, warm, slightly sweaty, brave in the way only children could be brave when they didn't yet understand the rules adults lived by. The doors to the Grand Echelon ballroom opened like a mouth. Light spilled out first. Gold light, chandelier light, light that made every diamond and every lie sparkle the same. Then came sound, laughter trimmed with cruelty, champagne glasses clinking like applause for people who had never earned it. Elena stepped forward, not fast, not timid, measured, like she had learned the room's rhythm before she ever entered it. Her dress was deep midnight blue, the kind that didn't beg to be seen, but forced the eye to settle on it anyway. The fabric moved like a shadow that had decided to become real. Around her throat, a thin silver chain caught the chandelier light, and the pendant resting against her skin looked almost too simple for a room like this. A locket, a single quiet piece of the past she refused to bury. The hand she held belonged to a boy, 6, maybe 7, hair neatly combed, small suit, shoes polished. He looked up at the ceiling once, at the chandeliers that resembled frozen waterfalls, then forward again as if he had already decided none of it was going to intimidate him. The room shifted. People didn't turn all at once. That would have been too obvious. Instead, one head tilted, then another. A pause in laughter, a hiccup in conversation, a ripple of recognition moving through old money like a sudden cold draft. Elena felt it land on her shoulders, the weight of being remembered. Someone near the bar dropped a fork. The sound was tiny, ridiculous, yet it sliced through the music like a warning. And across the ballroom, near the stage where the Hartwell Foundation banner hung like a crown, Daniel Hartwell froze with a champagne flute halfway to his mouth. His smile stayed on, out of habit. But his eyes drained of color. Beside him, Claire Monroe's fingers tightened around his arm. Her laugh cracked at the edges, like glass stressed too far. "No," Claire mouthed. Daniel's mother, Vivian Hartwell, turned slowly. Vivian didn't gasp. She didn't flinch. She simply stared, the way a queen stared at a servant who had forgotten her place. Her lips parted, and the word that left them was barely sound at all. "Elena." Elena didn't answer. She kept walking. Every step was a memory she had survived. Every step was a door she had once been slammed out of. The boy's hand remained in hers, steady. And when they reached the center of the ballroom, where the marble floor mirrored the chandelier light like water, the boy looked up at her again. "Mom," he said softly. "Is this the place?" Elena swallowed. This was the place she'd been erased. This was the place she'd been humiliated, blamed, discarded, while they applauded. "Yes," she whispered. "This is the place." The boy nodded as if he had expected that answer. Then, without fear, he looked straight toward Daniel Hartwell. And in a voice that wasn't loud, didn't need to be, he spoke a single word that made the entire room stop breathing. "Dad?" A sharp inhale swept through the crowd. Daniel's champagne flute slipped from his fingers. It didn't shatter. Someone's quick hand caught it. But the moment did. Claire's face went pale. Vivian's eyes narrowed into something lethal. And Elena felt the calm in her chest lock into place like a blade sliding into its sheath. Because this was the second they had all thought would never come. A forgotten wife returning. Not alone, not begging, but walking into their kingdom with a child at her side. And the power to burn it down or take it over. And to understand why that one word, Dad, could break a dynasty. We have to go back, not to the beginning, not to love, but to the first time Elena realized she was invisible in her own marriage. Because this story doesn't start here. It starts on a rainy night, with a locked door, and a woman holding her own heartbeat in her hands. Elena Marlowe used to believe quiet love was the purest kind. the kind that didn't demand an audience, the kind that lived in small acts, folding a suit jacket carefully so the shoulders wouldn't wrinkle, warming a mug of tea at midnight because someone else's ambition kept them awake, listening to worries that never had room to exist anywhere else. Daniel Hartwell had been hungry when she met him, not for food, for air, for space, for the kind of life that required a last name like his to unlock. But at 28, Daniel still carried the restless edge of a man who didn't feel secure inside his own inheritance. He'd told her once, late at night in their tiny first apartment, before the Hartwell mansion, before Vivian's stare, before the world learned to smile at Daniel like he was inevitable. "My mother doesn't love me," he said, eyes fixed on the city outside their window. "She loves the idea of me." Elena had leaned her head against his shoulder. "Then I'll love you," she whispered. "The real you." And Daniel had closed his eyes like that was enough. For a while, it almost was. When they married, it was quiet. A courthouse wedding with a few friends, a bouquet Elena bought herself, Daniel's suit a little too big in the shoulders because he hadn't yet tailored himself into the man his family demanded. Vivian Hartwell didn't attend. She sent a gift instead, a leather-bound calendar. Inside each page had a handwritten schedule in Vivian's sharp script. Monday, dinner with the board. Tuesday, charity gala planning. Wednesday, lunch with Monroe family. At the bottom of the first page, a final line. Elena may join when appropriate. It was Vivian's way of saying, "You are optional." Elena laughed it off at first, but she felt the cut. Because in Vivian's world, love was a transaction. Marriage was a merger. And Elena was a bad investment. The Hartwell mansion smelled like polished wood and cold roses. The hallways were wide enough to swallow footsteps. Portraits of Hartwell men lined the walls, stern faces, old money eyes, the kind of history that made you feel like you were trespassing in your own home. Vivian ran the house like a corporation. She had a list for everything, a rule for every room, a silence that punished more effectively than shouting. Elena tried. She learned the staff's names. She memorized which fork went where. She smiled until her jaw ached. But the mansion never warmed around her. Daniel was gone most days, chasing deals, chasing approval, chasing the version of himself his mother promised would finally feel worth it. When he came home, he was tired, and Elena would sit with him in the study, the only room that felt even slightly human because Daniel had once laughed in it. She would rub his shoulders, bring him coffee, tell him he was doing well. "Without you," Daniel said one night, forehead resting against her collarbone, "I'd drown in all of this." Elena believed him. She didn't know drowning people sometimes pull others under just to keep themselves afloat. Claire Monroe appeared like a perfume you couldn't ignore. She was everywhere. At the foundation meetings, at the board dinners, at the museum galas where Hartwell money bought art and applause. Claire's family was old money too, but softer, friendlier on the surface, deadlier underneath. Claire had the kind of smile that made other women question their own reflections, and Vivian adored her. "Elena," Vivian would say, voice smooth as ice, "Claire has a way with people. Watch her. Learn." At first, Elena tried to like Claire. Claire complimented her dresses, asked about her day, laughed at small jokes. But Claire's eyes never laughed. They measured. They calculated. And one evening, as Elena walked into the ballroom during a Hartwell Foundation planning session, she caught something that made her stomach tighten. Daniel's hand on Claire's back. Not a touch meant for guidance, a touch meant for ownership. Daniel pulled away quickly like a teenager caught stealing. Claire didn't. She simply turned and smiled at Elena as if nothing had happened. Elena told herself she imagined it. She told herself Daniel wouldn't. Because Daniel had needed her. Because Daniel had promised. Because Daniel had looked at her like she was home. Then came the first real crack. It wasn't a fight. It was worse. It was indifference. Elena stood in the kitchen one morning, holding an envelope she'd found on the marble counter, an invoice, a jewelry store, a necklace worth more than Elena's first apartment. She waited until Daniel came down, tie in hand, phone already pressed to his ear. "Daniel," she said softly. He covered the phone. "What?" She lifted the invoice. Daniel's eyes flicked to it, a flash of irritation. "It's for the foundation auction," he said too quickly. "A donor gift." Elena didn't push. She wanted to trust him. But when he left, she stared at the invoice again, and at the name printed beneath the purchase. Claire Monroe. Elena's fingers trembled. That night she asked Daniel gently, "Are you—" She swallowed, forcing the word out. "Are you happy?" Daniel didn't look up from his laptop. "What kind of question is that?" "The kind a wife asks." He sighed, rubbing his forehead. "Elena, I don't have time for this." Time. Always time. She felt something in her chest tighten like a knot. I feel like you're slipping away from me." Daniel finally looked at her, and in his eyes she saw it. Not love, not anger, a careful distance. "You're overthinking," he said. "You always do." The dismissal landed like a slap because it was calm, controlled, as if her feelings were an inconvenience. Elena nodded because she didn't know what else to do. And because she still believed quiet love could survive anything, she didn't realize quiet love could be buried alive. The Hartwell Foundation's annual gala approached like a storm. It was the event Vivian treated as a holy day. Sponsors, press, donors, politicians, everyone who mattered would be there. And on that night, Vivian planned to announce something. Elena didn't know what, but she felt it. Like the house held its breath. A week before the gala, Vivian summoned Elena to the sitting room. Vivian sat by the fireplace, her posture perfect, a cup of tea untouched beside her. Claire sat across from her, legs crossed, eyes bright. Daniel stood behind Vivian's chair, one hand resting lightly on the back like he belonged there. Elena entered, and the room went quiet in that way that never meant peace. "Sit," Vivian said. Elena sat. Vivian slid a folder across the table. "Do you recognize these?" Vivian asked. Elena opened the folder. Bank statements, wire transfers, large amounts. Her name printed on them. Elena's breath caught. "That's not—" she began. Vivian leaned forward. "The foundation has been bleeding funds. We traced the transactions. They lead to an account under your name." Elena's hands went cold. "I don't have an account like that." Claire tilted her head, feigning sympathy. "Elena, if you're in trouble, you can tell us." "I'm not in trouble," Elena said, voice rising despite herself. "I didn't do this." Daniel finally spoke, voice low. "Elena, please don't make this harder." She turned to him. The man she had loved looked away. And in that moment, Elena understood something terrifying. He wasn't confused. He wasn't surprised. He had already chosen. The gala was in 7 days. Vivian's voice softened, the way a knife softened before it cut. "For the sake of the Hartwell name," Vivian said, "we will handle this privately. You will sign a resignation from the foundation. You will sign divorce papers. And you will leave this house." Elena's vision blurred. "Divorce?" she whispered. Vivian's eyes didn't blink. "You are a liability." Elena looked at Daniel again. He didn't defend her. He didn't even meet her eyes. He simply said, "I'm sorry." 2 words, so small, so final. Elena's mouth tasted like metal. She stood slowly, folder shaking in her hands. "This is a mistake," she said. "You're making a mistake." Claire's smile flickered. Just a fraction. Vivian's expression remained unchanged. "Sign," Vivian said, sliding a pen forward. Elena didn't take it. Not yet. Because some part of her still believed someone would save her. Because she still believed Daniel would say, "No, not her, not my wife." But Daniel stayed silent, and the silence was the loudest betrayal of her life. The night of the gala arrived dressed in diamonds. The Hartwell mansion glowed like a palace, lights spilling onto the wet driveway where limousines lined up like black beetles. The air smelled of rain and expensive cologne. Elena stood in the upstairs bathroom, staring at her reflection. The dress Vivian's assistant had laid out for her was pale gray, beautiful, elegant, and somehow funeral-like. Elena's hands hovered over the fabric. She felt like she was putting on her own ending. Downstairs, music swelled, guests laughed. The world celebrated the Hartwells. Elena walked down the staircase slowly. Each step felt heavier. When she entered the ballroom, heads turned, not because she looked stunning, because she looked like a woman walking into her own execution. Daniel stood near the stage, tuxedo sharp, smile practiced. Claire stood beside him in crimson, her hand resting lightly on his arm like she belonged there. Vivian moved through the crowd like royalty. Elena crossed the room trying to reach Daniel, but Vivian intercepted her with a perfect smile for the cameras. "Ah," Vivian said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "There you are!" Elena's stomach dropped. Vivian linked her arm through Elena's, not gently, not warmly, possessively, and guided her toward the stage. "Vivian," Elena whispered. Vivian's smile didn't move. "Do not embarrass us." The stage lights brightened. A microphone stood at the center like a weapon. Vivian took it first. "Ladies and gentlemen," Vivian began, voice smooth, practiced, "thank you for joining the Hartwell Foundation's annual gala. Tonight, we celebrate generosity, integrity, and legacy." Applause. Elena stood slightly behind Vivian, heart hammering. Vivian continued, "But integrity requires truth." Elena's blood ran cold. Vivian turned, her gaze landing on Elena like a spotlight. "Unfortunately," Vivian said, "we have discovered a breach of trust within our own organization." The room murmured. Elena's breath caught. Vivian lifted the folder, and held it up. "Funds meant for charity," Vivian said, voice tinged with controlled disappointment, "were diverted. Stolen." Gasps. Elena felt the floor tilt. Vivian's voice sharpened. "And the evidence leads to one person." Vivian stepped aside, and suddenly the stage lights hit Elena directly. Blinding. Exposing. Every face in the crowd turned toward her. Elena's mouth opened, but no sound came. Daniel stood at the edge of the stage, expression unreadable. Claire watched with eyes that glittered like satisfaction. Vivian spoke into the microphone again. "Elena Hartwell," Vivian said, "my son's wife." A pause, just long enough for the crowd to lean in. "She has betrayed this family and this foundation." The ballroom erupted in whispers. Elena's ears rang. She forced herself forward, grabbing the microphone with shaking hands. "I didn't," she said, voice cracking. "I didn't take anything." The crowd's whispers thickened. Vivian leaned close, speaking softly so only Elena could hear. "Wrong answer," Vivian murmured. "You should have signed quietly." Elena turned toward Daniel. "Daniel," she pleaded, voice small in the vast room. Tell them it's not me." Daniel's jaw clenched. For a second, Elena thought she saw pain. Then Daniel stepped forward, took the microphone from her hands, and spoke. "My wife," Daniel said, voice steady, "has been under stress. She made mistakes." Elena's world stopped. He didn't say she was innocent. He didn't defend her. He framed her collapse as guilt, and the crowd heard what they wanted to hear: confession. Elena's knees nearly buckled. Daniel continued, "The Hartwell family will repay what was lost, and we will cooperate with any investigation." Vivian's hand touched Daniel's shoulder in approval. Elena stared at him, unable to breathe. Claire's lips curved into a small, private smile. Vivian turned to Elena again, her voice returning to that poisonous sweetness. "Elena," Vivian said into the microphone, "for the sake of dignity, please step down." Dignity. Elena's fingers curled into fists. She couldn't scream. Not here. Not with all these people watching. But she could refuse to be silent. "This is a lie," Elena said, voice shaking. "Someone is framing me." Vivian raised a brow. "Are you accusing us, dear?" Elena's eyes burned. She looked at Daniel, searching for the man who once said he'd drown without her. He avoided her gaze. That was when Vivian struck the final blow. A staff member approached with a document folder and a pen. Divorce papers. Right there. In front of everyone. Elena's throat tightened. "You can't." Vivian's voice dropped, sharp enough to cut. "Sign, or we call the police tonight." The crowd watched like it was theater. Elena's hands trembled as she held the pen. Daniel finally looked at her then, not with love, with impatience. "Just sign," he whispered. Elena's heart cracked open. She signed. One signature, and her last name became a costume she was forced to remove. Vivian took the papers, satisfied. And as the orchestra swelled again, because the gala would not pause for her ruin, Vivian leaned close to Elena's ear. "You were never meant to be here," Vivian whispered. "Now everyone knows." Elena stepped off the stage like a woman walking out of her own body. The world blurred. Faces turned away, already bored with her tragedy. She made it to the front doors before her breath broke into sobs. Outside, rain poured like the sky was trying to wash the night clean. Elena stepped into it, dress soaking, hair clinging to her skin. She clutched her silver locket, the only thing she'd kept that wasn't Hartwell property. The driver, a Hartwell employee, stood by the car, eyes lowered. "Where to, ma'am?" he asked softly, and the word ma'am hurt because she no longer belonged anywhere. Elena didn't have an answer, because Vivian had taken her home. Daniel had taken her name. And the world had taken her dignity. The car drove through rain and city lights, Elena staring out the window as the mansion disappeared behind her like a dream turning into a nightmare. Hours later, in a small rented room she'd managed to secure with an old friend's help, Elena collapsed on the bed, shaking. She didn't cry loudly. She cried the way people cry when they can't afford to fall apart. Silent, stifled, alone. In the bathroom, she vomited from stress, from humiliation, from the taste of betrayal. Then she noticed something. Her period was late. She stared at the calendar on her phone, counting days with trembling fingers. No. She shook her head. Not now. But the test the next morning didn't care about timing. 2 lines. Bright, unforgiving. Elena sat on the edge of the tub, the test in her hand, rain still dripping from her hair. A baby. Daniel's baby. A life growing inside her, even as her life had been ripped apart. Her hand flew to her mouth as a sob escaped. Then, slowly, she pressed her palm to her stomach. "I'm here," she whispered. "I'm here." For a moment, warmth flickered through her grief. Then reality crashed back. If Vivian found out, if Daniel found out, they would take the baby, not out of love, out of ownership, because Hartwells didn't lose assets. They reclaimed them. Elena looked at her reflection in the mirror, eyes swollen, skin pale, lips trembling, and she made a decision that felt like swallowing fire. She would disappear. Not because she was weak, because she was finally strong enough to protect something more important than her pride. She packed a small bag, took only essentials, and before she left, she opened her silver locket. Inside was a tiny photograph of her mother, smiling softly, eyes warm. On the other side, a name engraved in delicate script. Victor Liang. Elena hadn't spoken that name in years. Her father. The man she had run from to prove she could survive without power. The man she had refused to use because she'd wanted love that wasn't bought. Now, with a child in her body and predators behind her, Elena didn't need pride. She needed shelter. She needed a fortress. She needed a man powerful enough that even Vivian Hartwell would hesitate. Elena closed the locket. Then she walked out into the rain. The first time Elena saw Victor Liang again, she almost turned around. Not because she was afraid of him, because she was afraid of what returning to him meant. Victor's estate sat beyond the city, behind gates that didn't just keep people out. They kept secrets in. Security cameras tracked every movement. Guards stood like statues. Elena arrived with a single suitcase and a heartbeat inside her. When the gate opened, it felt like crossing into another world, a world where power didn't need to shout. It simply existed. The house was modern, glass and stone, surrounded by water features that whispered softly in the wind. Inside, everything was quiet, too quiet. A staff member led Elena through hallways that smelled faintly of cedar and something else, something sterile, like money kept cold. Victor waited in a private study. He stood when she entered. He was older than Elena remembered, hair silver at the temples, face carved with discipline. His eyes, dark and sharp, landed on her like a judgment. Elena's throat tightened. She hadn't come to reconcile. She'd come to survive. "Father," she said, and the word felt foreign. Victor didn't soften. "You have been gone," he said, voice low, "for 8 years." Elena's fingers tightened around her suitcase handle. "I didn't come for a lecture." Victor's gaze dropped to her soaked dress, her trembling hands, the bruise-like shadows under her eyes. "Then why did you come?" Elena swallowed, seesawing between pride and desperation, because the truth was simple, because admitting it tasted like defeat. She opened her locket, held it out, the engraved name catching the light. "I came," Elena said, voice barely steady, "because I'm pregnant." For the first time, Victor's expression changed, not into tenderness, into focus. "Whose?" he asked. Elena's jaw clenched. "Daniel Hartwell." Silence. Victor's eyes narrowed, a storm behind them. "The Hartwells," he said, as if tasting poison. "They touched you." Elena flinched at his wording. "I married him." Victor took a slow breath. "You married without my knowledge," he said. "I didn't want your money," Elena snapped, exhaustion finally breaking through. "I wanted a life that was mine." Victor studied her. Then, quietly, he said, "And was it yours?" Elena's lips trembled. She thought of the stage lights, the microphone, the divorce papers. Daniel's eyes looking away. Her voice cracked. "No." Victor stepped closer, not comforting, claiming. "You are my daughter," he said, voice flat. "No one erases what belongs to me." Elena hated how those words should have made her feel safe. She hated how they did. Victor turned toward his desk, pressed a button on his phone. "Prepare the East Wing," he said. "Private staff, medical team, security protocol A." Elena stared. "You're just doing this?" she whispered. Victor looked at her. "You came because you knew I would." Tears burned Elena's eyes, not because she was grateful, because she was realizing how alone she'd been pretending to be. Victor's estate became her hiding place. But it wasn't a warm nest. It was a training ground. Elena gave birth in winter, when the trees outside were bare and the air smelled of snow. The labor was long, painful. And through it all, Elena clutched her locket, pressing it to her lips between contractions like prayer. When the baby finally arrived, a boy with a shock of dark hair and a loud, indignant cry, Elena sobbed in relief. They placed him on her chest, warm, real, alive. Elena stared at him, breathless. "Leo," she whispered, the name coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. "Your name is Leo." Because lions survived, because lions didn't beg, because lions remembered who they were. Victor visited once the next day. He didn't coo. He didn't smile. He looked at the baby like he was assessing a future. "A Hartwell heir," Victor said quietly. Elena bristled. "He's my son." Victor's gaze flicked to her. "He is both." Elena held Leo tighter. "He will not be used," she said fiercely. Victor's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes sharpened. "Then you must become someone no one can use." In the months that followed, Elena healed, physically, emotionally. She hardened, not into cruelty, into clarity. Victor didn't keep her locked away like a doll. He gave her choices, but they were the kind of choices that came with weight. "You want to protect your son," Victor said one evening, as Elena watched Leo sleep in a crib carved from pale wood. "Then you must understand how the world works. You cannot fight power with pleading." Elena didn't answer, because she already knew. Victor introduced her to people who spoke in numbers and law, attorneys who explained how reputations were destroyed, investigators who traced money like blood trails, advisors who taught Elena how to read contracts like weapons. Elena listened. At first, she felt like she was betraying who she used to be, the woman who believed in quiet love, the woman who thought kindness could fix everything. But every time she doubted, she remembered the stage, the spotlight, Daniel's just sign, and she kept learning. Years passed like pages turning faster than she could catch. Leo grew into a bright-eyed child who asked questions that pierced straight through adult lies. "Why don't we visit Dad?" he asked once when he was 4, drawing lions with crayons. Elena froze. She hadn't told him much, only that his father lived far away, only that his father wasn't safe. Leo looked up at her, eyes wide and honest. "Did he hurt you?" Leo asked quietly. Elena's throat tightened. She knelt, smoothing his hair. "He hurt me," she admitted softly. "But you're not a mistake. You're the best thing that ever happened to me." Leo's small hand touched her cheek. "Then we don't need him," Leo said simply. Elena laughed through tears. Children said what adults spent years learning. Victor watched Leo from a distance, a silent presence. But Elena noticed small things. The way Victor paused at Leo's laughter. The way he stood outside the nursery door longer than necessary. The way his security chief reported, "Young Master Liang is doing well today," and Victor's jaw softened almost imperceptibly. Victor never said, "I love you." He showed love through control, through protection, through building walls so thick nothing could break through. And Elena accepted that kind of love because she no longer had the luxury of demanding softness from powerful men. Still inside her, something remained tender. A scar didn't mean the skin was gone. It meant the skin had survived. Then when Leo was 6, the past came knocking, not with an apology, with desperation. Hartwell Group was struggling. Elena learned that in the way Victor taught her to learn everything, quietly, accurately, through people who didn't gossip but reported. A private investigator placed a folder on Elena's desk. "Hartwell Group," he said. "Debt restructuring, investor panic, several board members quietly selling off positions." Elena stared at the papers. A flicker of something, vindication, maybe, rose in her. Then she forced it down. "Why are you bringing me this?" she asked. The investigator glanced at Victor, who stood near the window. Victor didn't look at Elena. He looked out at the water beyond the estate. Because the world outside was always moving, always hungrier. Because, Victor said, voice calm, they are hosting a gala. Elena's hand stilled. Victor continued, a merger announcement, a plea dressed in celebration. They need money, and Vivian Hartwell is searching for a mysterious investor to save them. Elena's heartbeat slowed. A gala. The same stage, the same lights, the same place she'd been erased. Victor finally turned, his gaze locking onto Elena. You have lived in hiding long enough, he said. Do you want them to keep rewriting your story? Elena's fingers traced the edge of her locket, the silver cool under her touch. She thought of Leo's hand in hers. She thought of how she'd stayed silent for years, believing safety meant invisibility. But safety had a cost. It meant letting them believe they'd won. It meant letting them walk through life untouched by consequence. Elena lifted her chin. What do you suggest? She asked. Victor's mouth curved, not quite a smile. A comeback, he said. Elena's breath caught. Victor stepped closer, placing a file on her desk. Inside were documents, investment structures, shell companies, share acquisitions. A plan, not to beg the Hartwells, to buy them. Elena, Victor said quietly, you can return as a victim. He leaned closer, voice low, sharp. Or you can return as the person holding the leash. Elena stared at the documents. Her hands didn't shake, not anymore. Outside, rain began to fall lightly against the glass, a familiar sound. Elena closed the folder, and she made a decision that felt like stepping onto a stage again, this time with her own script. We go to the gala, Elena said. Victor's eyes glinted. And Leo? He asked. Elena thought of her son, brave, honest, unafraid. She thought of the truth he deserved. She exhaled slowly. He comes with me, Elena said. Victor nodded once. Good, he said. Let them see what they tried to erase. The Grand Echelon ballroom hadn't changed. Still gold, still loud, still full of people congratulating themselves for being born into the right families. But Elena had changed, and tonight she didn't enter as a forgotten wife. She entered as a storm wearing silk. Backstage, before the doors opened, Elena crouched in front of Leo, adjusting his tie. He watched her carefully. Are you scared? He asked. Elena's fingers paused. Was she? Fear used to be a cage. Now it was fuel. I'm alert, she said honestly. Leo nodded as if that made sense. Do they deserve you? He asked. Elena's throat tightened. Some of them don't deserve anyone, she said softly. But we're not here for them. We're here for us. Leo's eyes flicked to her locket. Is Grandpa coming? He asked. Elena smiled faintly. He's watching. Victor wouldn't walk into the ballroom. Not yet. Power rarely appeared early. It waited. It let people make mistakes. Then it collected. The doors opened, and Elena walked in. The room reacted exactly as she remembered, like a predator pack recognizing prey that had returned with claws. Whispers sliced through the air. Is that? No, she's gone. That's Elena. Why is she here? Elena didn't flinch. She moved through them like water through stones. Daniel saw her. Claire saw her. Vivian saw her, and the room held its breath. Then Leo said it. Dad? The word hit the ballroom like a gunshot. Daniel's face drained. He took one step forward without thinking, then stopped as if an invisible wall slammed into his chest. Elena, he whispered. Claire's hand tightened around his arm. That's not, Claire began, voice too high. That's not funny. Vivian's eyes narrowed, scanning Leo's face. And for a second, Elena saw it. Vivian recognized the Hartwell line in Leo's jaw, in the shape of his eyes. Vivian's mouth tightened. Her voice came out like ice. What is this? Vivian demanded. Elena didn't answer her. She looked at Daniel, not with longing, with a calm that hurt more than anger. Hello, Daniel, Elena said. Daniel swallowed. His voice was rough. Where have you been? Elena almost laughed. Where had she been? In the wreckage he helped create, in the shadow of a man powerful enough to rebuild her, in the years he didn't bother to search. Living, Elena said simply. Daniel's eyes dropped to Leo. His throat worked. That's my... He couldn't finish. Vivian stepped forward, her smile snapping into place as if she could control the narrative. Elena, Vivian said, voice sweetly poisonous, you are not invited. Elena tilted her head. Actually, I am. Vivian's brow lifted. By whom? Elena's gaze slid toward the stage, toward the banner, toward the microphone. The investors, Elena said. Claire laughed sharply. Investors? You? She looked Elena up and down, sneer returning. You couldn't even keep a charity account straight. The insult was old. Elena didn't react. She reached into her clutch and pulled out an envelope. Not thick, not dramatic, simple. She handed it to Daniel. Daniel hesitated, then took it, fingers trembling. He opened it. Inside, a DNA report, a birth certificate, and a legal notice. Daniel's eyes scanned the pages. His face went from shock to disbelief to something like grief. He's mine, Daniel whispered. Elena didn't deny it. Vivian snatched the report from Daniel's hand, reading quickly. Her eyes widened, just a fraction. Then she hissed, This is fabrication. Elena's smile was small. You can test again, Elena said. As many times as you want. Claire's voice shook. Why are you doing this now? Elena looked at Claire, and in her gaze, Claire finally saw something she hadn't expected. Not jealousy, not desperation, judgment. Because you laughed, Elena said quietly, and because my son deserves the truth. Vivian stepped closer, lowering her voice. Elena, Vivian warned, you do not get to walk back in here with a child and make demands. Elena leaned in slightly, meeting Vivian's stare. I'm not making demands, Elena said softly. I'm making introductions. Vivian's eyes narrowed. To whom? Elena straightened and turned toward the crowd, toward the stage. The music softened as if the orchestra sensed the tension. A host stepped up to the microphone, voice bright. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced, thank you for joining us tonight for the Hartwell Foundation Gala, where we celebrate... Elena walked forward. The host faltered, startled by her approach. Elena didn't ask permission. She took the microphone. A collective gasp swept the room. Vivian's face tightened in rage. Daniel stared, frozen. Claire looked like she might faint. Elena's voice carried, clear, calm, trained. Good evening, Elena said. My name is Elena Marlowe. A pause. I was once Elena Hartwell, she continued, and the room rippled again. But I learned the hard way that names can be taken. She looked across the crowd, letting them feel the weight of that statement. Tonight, Elena said, you were expecting an announcement, a celebration of Hartwell's future. She smiled faintly. I am the future. Silence. Elena lifted one hand. At the back of the room, a door opened, and a man stepped in. Not Victor, yet. But Victor's chief counsel, flanked by assistants carrying folders, followed by the security detail that made people instinctively move aside. The counsel approached the stage, handed Elena a document. Elena opened it and held it up. This is a notice of acquisition, Elena said. Effective today, the majority stake of Hartwell Group has been transferred to Liang Holdings. The room exploded in whispers. Vivian's face turned white. Daniel swayed slightly. "What?" he breathed. Elena's gaze locked onto his. "I bought your company," she said simply. Claire's mouth fell open. Vivian's voice shook with fury. "Liang Holdings? That's—" "Elena," Daniel whispered, voice breaking. "Liang?" Elena's fingers touched her locket, a quiet gesture. "Meet my father," she said. And then the back doors opened again. Victor Liang entered the ballroom. He didn't rush. He didn't smile. He walked like gravity itself had decided to wear a suit. The room parted. People who had ignored Elena once now watched her like she was a loaded gun. Victor stopped near the stage, looking up at Elena, then at Leo. Leo held Elena's hand, chin lifted, unafraid. Victor's gaze softened, barely. Then he looked at Vivian. Two empires, two predators, staring across a ballroom full of prey. "You," Vivian hissed. Victor's voice was calm. "Mrs. Hartwell." Vivian's lip curled. "We don't do business with—" Victor cut her off with a single glance. "You did," he said, "when you touched my daughter." The word daughter struck like thunder. The room froze. Daniel's breath hitched. Elena looked down at Leo, feeling the boy's hand squeeze hers. This was the moment they understood she hadn't crawled back. She had returned with an army behind her name, and a child beside her heart. But Elena wasn't finished. Because power wasn't just money, it was truth. And Elena had carried truth for years like a blade under her skin. She looked at Daniel. "You accused me of stealing," Elena said, voice steady. "You humiliated me. You signed papers that erased me." Daniel's eyes glistened. "Elena, I didn't know." Elena raised a hand. "I'm not here for your excuses," she said. She turned toward the crowd. "I am here," Elena said, "to correct the record." She nodded to Victor's counsel. The counsel stepped forward, handing copies of documents to the host, to the board members present, to the press. Evidence, transactions, emails, wire transfers. Elena spoke into the microphone. "The embezzlement," Elena said, "was real." Vivian stiffened. Claire's face went pale. Elena continued, "But it was not committed by me." The room held its breath. Elena's eyes cut to Claire. "It was committed by someone who believed she could buy her way into a family," Elena said. Claire shook her head, panicked. No, that's... Daniel..." Elena's voice sharpened, still calm. "And it was covered up," Elena said, "by someone who believed bloodlines were more important than truth." Vivian's hand clenched. Daniel looked between them, horror dawning. Elena leaned closer to the microphone, voice dropping slightly, forcing the room to lean in. "Tonight," Elena said, "the Hartwell Foundation will be audited. Hartwell Group will be restructured, and my son—" She looked down at Leo. "My son," Elena repeated, voice softening, "will never be treated like a secret again." Leo lifted his chin, eyes fixed on Daniel. Daniel looked like he was staring at a ghost and a miracle at the same time. Elena's voice returned to steel. "If anyone wants to challenge this," Elena said, "we can do it in court." And with that, she handed the microphone back to the host like she was done with their stage. The ballroom stayed silent, because they all understood something now. The forgotten wife wasn't asking to be remembered. She was deciding what they would be allowed to forget. The lawsuit hit like a tidal wave. By morning, headlines screamed. Not because society cared about Elena's pain, but because society cared about power-changing hands. Liang Holdings acquires Hartwell Group. Mysterious investor revealed, Elena Marlowe, Victor Liang's daughter. Scandal at Hartwell Foundation. Audit launched. Daniel didn't sleep. He sat in his office, staring at old photographs on his desk, photos he had kept even after the divorce, because part of him had never wanted to admit what he'd done. Elena in a simple dress at their courthouse wedding. Elena laughing in their first apartment kitchen. Elena holding a mug of tea, eyes soft. And now, Elena on a stage, holding a microphone like a verdict, with a child realizing he had a father who didn't deserve him. Daniel pressed his hands to his face, breath shaking. "How did I not know?" he whispered to an empty room. But he did know. He had known something was wrong that night of the gala years ago. He had known Vivian moved too quickly, too cleanly. He had known Claire's smile was too satisfied. He had known Elena's eyes held innocence, not guilt. He had chosen convenience. He had chosen safety. He had chosen his mother's approval over his wife's truth. Now the bill had arrived, and it was written in blood and court documents. Elena filed suit for defamation, wrongful termination, emotional damages. But more importantly, she filed for legal recognition of Leo's paternity and sole custody protections. She didn't do it to punish Daniel with the child. She did it to ensure Vivian could never claim Leo as a Hartwell asset. Daniel's lawyers approached her with offers: money, settlements, silence. Elena refused. "Court," she said simply, because the courtroom wasn't just about winning. It was about making truth official. The day of the hearing, rain fell again, a motif the universe seemed unwilling to abandon. Elena arrived in a tailored black coat, hair pulled back, locket resting against her throat. Leo walked beside her, holding her hand. Victor walked behind them, expression unreadable. Photographers shouted, "Elena, is Leo Daniel's son? Elena, are you taking over Hartwell Group? Victor, is this revenge?" Elena didn't answer. She didn't owe the world her story. She owed it to her son. Inside the courthouse, the air smelled of old paper and tension. Daniel waited at the defense table. He stood when Elena entered, eyes locked on Leo. Leo looked back. No fear, only questions. Daniel swallowed hard, voice barely audible. "Hi," he said. Leo didn't respond. Elena guided Leo into a seat beside her legal counsel. Daniel's gaze flicked to Elena. "Why didn't you tell me?" he whispered. Elena didn't look at him. "You didn't ask," she said quietly. The judge entered. Court is now in session. Vivian arrived late, wearing pearl earrings like armor. Claire arrived with her own legal team, face pale, eyes darting. The prosecution began with the defamation case. Elena's lawyer presented evidence: internal emails, forged signatures, manipulated wire transfers. The courtroom screens displayed documents like autopsies. Vivian's composed mask started to crack. Claire's hands shook. Daniel stared at the evidence, stomach twisting. A particularly damning email appeared. Claire to Vivian. "If we place the transfers under Elena's name, Daniel will sign. He always does." The courtroom murmured. Daniel's breath hitched. Vivian's eyes flashed. Claire's mouth fell open, shaking her head. "That's not," Claire stammered. "It's out of context." Elena sat still, watching, not gloating, witnessing, because the truth didn't need emotion, it needed light. Then came the custody portion. Daniel's attorney stood. "Your Honor," he said, "Mr. Hartwell was unaware of the child's existence. He seeks joint custody and visitation rights." Elena's chest tightened. Not because she hated Daniel, because she feared Vivian's reach. Elena's lawyer rose. "Your Honor," she said, "the child's safety is at risk due to the Hartwell family's history of coercion and manipulation. We request sole custody with supervised visitation pending a psychological evaluation and protective order against Mrs. Hartwell." Vivian stood abruptly. "Outrageous." The judge raised a hand. "Sit down, Mrs. Hartwell." Vivian's face reddened. The judge turned to Elena. "Ms. Marlowe," the judge said, Why did you hide the child from his father? Elena's hands tightened around her locket. She took a slow breath. Because this was the moment people always judged mothers, not for what was done to them, but for how they survived it. Elena stood. Her voice was steady but soft. Because, Elena said, when I was accused and humiliated, Mr. Hartwell didn't ask if it was true. She looked at Daniel. He flinched. Elena continued. His mother threatened me with police. His family treated me as disposable. She swallowed. I was pregnant, she said, and the courtroom fell silent. And I knew, if they knew, I would never be allowed to raise my own child. Vivian scoffed. Elena's gaze snapped to her. You called me a liability, Elena said. Do you know what you would have called my son? Vivian's face tightened. Elena turned back to the judge. So I disappeared, Elena said. Not out of spite, out of survival. The judge studied her, then asked, And during those years, who supported you? This was the question, the one that would reveal what the ballroom had already learned. Elena's voice didn't waver. My father, she said, a murmur. The judge raised a brow. Your father is... Elena's fingers touched her locket. Victor Liang, she said. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Even the bailiff shifted. Daniel's face went slack. Vivian's eyes widened in fury, not surprise. She had known at the gala. But now it was official. On record. Under oath. The judge tapped the gavel. Order. The judge's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. So the child is also connected to Liang Holdings, the judge said. Elena didn't flinch. Yes, she said. But this is not about money. This is about protection. Daniel's attorney stood, trying to regain control. Your Honor, he said quickly, Mr. Hartwell has the means to provide... Elena's lawyer cut in. Your Honor, she said, the question is not means. The question is trust. The judge looked at Daniel. Mr. Hartwell, the judge said, did you participate in the public accusation against Ms. Marlowe? Daniel's throat tightened. He glanced at Elena, at Leo. His voice broke. Yes, Daniel said. I did. The courtroom murmured again. The judge leaned forward. Did you verify the evidence before you allowed your wife to be accused? The judge asked. Daniel's eyes closed. No, he admitted. I didn't. Vivian's nails dug into her palm. The judge turned to Vivian. Mrs. Hartwell, the judge said, did you authorize the public announcement? Vivian's chin lifted. I authorized truth. Elena's lawyer stood. Your Honor, may we present Exhibit 12? The screen lit up with security footage from years ago, Vivian's assistant placing documents on the counter. Claire slipping an envelope into Elena's bag. Timestamps, clear as daylight. Claire's face crumpled. Vivian's posture stiffened. The judge's jaw tightened. Mrs. Hartwell, the judge said coldly. This looks like a setup. Vivian's voice sharpened. This is manipulation, Liang manipulation. The Victor finally spoke from the back of the courtroom, voice calm. No, Victor said. This is accountability. The judge ignored him, eyes locked on Vivian. Mrs. Hartwell, the judge said, you are not on trial today, but you are very close to contempt. Sit. Down. Vivian sat, trembling with fury. Claire's lawyer whispered to her urgently. Claire's shoulders shook. Daniel stared at the footage like it was a knife carving out his past. He turned toward Elena, eyes wet. Elena, he whispered. Elena raised a hand, not cruel, final. Not here, she said softly. Because apologies didn't erase years. They only marked the moment someone finally saw the damage. The judge called a recess. In the hallway, reporters swarmed. Daniel stepped toward Elena, voice raw. Please, he said. "Let me talk to him. Let me talk to my son." Elena looked at him, and for the first time her calm wavered, just slightly. "Do you know what it felt like?" she asked quietly. "To carry your child alone while you toasted with the woman who framed me?" Daniel flinched like she'd slapped him. "I didn't know," he whispered again. Elena's eyes burned. "You didn't want to know," she corrected softly. Leo watched them, face serious. Daniel crouched slowly, careful, like approaching a frightened animal. "Leo," Daniel said, voice trembling, I'm your father." Leo studied him, then asked the question that broke Daniel in half. "Where were you when my mom cried?" Leo asked. Daniel's breath hitched. He couldn't answer. Because "I didn't know" wasn't enough. Leo's gaze didn't waver. "My mom says people can make mistakes," Leo said. "But she also says people have to fix them." Daniel nodded, tears falling. "I want to fix it," he whispered. "If she lets me." Leo looked at Elena. Elena's chest tightened. This wasn't just about vengeance. This was about what kind of man Leo would believe men could become. Elena knelt beside Leo, smoothing his hair. "We'll talk," she said softly to Daniel. "After the court decides what's safe." Daniel nodded like that was more mercy than he deserved. Back in the courtroom, the judge delivered decisions. Claire faced charges for fraud and conspiracy based on the evidence presented and the ongoing audit. Vivian received a protective order restricting contact with Leo pending further review. Daniel was granted the right to supervised visitation contingent on therapy and compliance. Elena was granted primary custody. And Hartwell Group, under Yang Holdings, was placed under restructuring with mandated transparency. The gavel struck. Final. But as Elena stood to leave, Vivian's voice hissed behind her. "This isn't over," Vivian said, eyes blazing. "You think money makes you worthy? You're still the girl who didn't belong." Elena paused, turned slowly, and for the first time, she allowed herself a smile that wasn't soft. "No," Elena said quietly. "I'm the woman you tried to erase." She glanced down at Leo. "And this," she said, "is the legacy you couldn't control." Vivian's face twisted. Elena walked away. Not running, not hiding, leaving the courtroom the same way she had entered the ballroom, with her child by her side, with her name reclaimed, and with the past finally forced to kneel. The rain stopped 3 days after the verdict. The sky cleared the way it did after a storm that had wrung itself dry. Elena stood on the balcony of her apartment, not a wing in her father's estate, not a room in the Hartwell mansion. A place she chose, a place that belonged to her and Leo. Inside, Leo sat at the dining table drawing, tongue peeking out in concentration. He was drawing a lion again. But this time, the lion had a crown. Not a crown someone placed on its head. A crown it grew into. Elena touched her locket. The silver was warm now, not cold, because it wasn't just a relic of pain anymore. It was proof she survived. Her phone buzzed. A message from Daniel. "I'm starting therapy. I'll do whatever the court requires. Thank you for not shutting the door completely." Elena stared at the text for a long moment. In the past, she would have responded with paragraphs, explaining, softening, fixing. Now, she typed one sentence. "Do it for Leo, not for me." She set the phone down. Leo looked up. "Was that Dad?" he asked. Elena nodded. Leo's brow furrowed. "Is he sad?" Elena thought of Daniel's face in court, broken, stripped of arrogance. "Yes," Elena said softly. "He's sad." Leo considered that. "Good," Leo said, then paused, eyes serious. "But I don't want him to be mean." Elena's throat tightened. You don't have to hate him, she said gently. You just have to learn who to trust. Leo nodded slowly. Like you, he said. Elena smiled, brushing her fingers over his hair. Like me, she agreed. That evening, Victor visited. He stood in the doorway, looking around the modest apartment as if it were a foreign language. This is small, Victor said. Elena raised a brow. It's peaceful. Victor's gaze landed on Leo's drawings scattered on the table. He paused. Leo looked up. Grandpa, Leo said, grinning, I drew you a lion. Victor stared at the paper. A lion with sharp eyes, broad shoulders, a crown. Victor's jaw tightened. Then he did something Elena hadn't seen him do in years. He reached out and took the drawing carefully. Good, Victor said, voice low. Leo beamed. Elena watched them, feeling a strange warmth in her chest. Not because everything was perfect, but because something had shifted. Victor stayed for tea. He didn't talk much, but he sat at the table while Leo explained his drawings. And Elena realized power wasn't only in money or courtrooms. Sometimes power was the ability to sit down in a small apartment and be present. Later, after Victor left, Elena tucked Leo into bed. Leo clutched his stuffed lion, eyes heavy. Mom, he murmured, are we safe now? Elena sat on the edge of the bed, smoothing his blanket. She thought of Vivian's eyes, Claire's desperate lies, Daniel's regret, the world's hunger for stories like theirs. Safety wasn't a permanent state. It was something you built daily, but Elena didn't want to teach Leo fear. She wanted to teach him strength. We're safer, Elena said softly, because we're not invisible anymore. Leo's eyelids fluttered. He whispered, I like being seen. Elena's throat tightened. Me too, she whispered. She leaned down, kissed his forehead, and as she turned off the light, she paused in the doorway, looking back at her son. The room was quiet, but not lonely. Elena touched her locket again, feeling the steady rhythm of her own heartbeat. For years, she had been the forgotten wife, the woman erased from photographs and conversations, the woman pushed out of a ballroom under glittering lights. But now she was a mother, a protector, a woman who learned the language of power without losing the language of love. And somewhere in the city, a man named Daniel Hartwell was learning that losing someone wasn't punishment. It was consequence. Elena closed the door gently, and for the first time in a long time, she breathed like someone who had finally come home. If this story touched something inside you, if you've ever been underestimated, erased, or told you didn't belong, leave a small message below. You don't have to explain everything. Just a word is enough. Because if you've ever felt alone in the dark, you're not alone here, alone.